I'm going to get us started, 12:02, and I think, Leanna, you're going to record this, correct? Perfect. And so what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to start sharing a screen, but just before I do that, a couple of things. I think most of you are on mute right now. Feel free, if you want to ask a question at any point, you can go into the chat. Leanna's going to keep a little eye on that for me, and so if there's a question that comes up, you know, feel free to go, got a question, and then you can unmute yourself and come back on to pop in the question. I'd like this to be interactive. You know, I think everybody's got their own experiences, and we're going to kind of share that as we go along. If you want to, well, I guess there'll be points where I'm going to specifically ask you to go into the chat. So go into that bottom little bubble that's got like a little speech thing. I think most people have found it. Maybe you can prove to me that you found it by just writing something in there right now. I can see Christine and Sandra have it, but maybe Marcella and I don't know, C-A-L tune. Just go ahead and put it in just so I can see it. Okay, great. Caitlin's got it. Everybody else find the chat? No? Good, yeah. Well, I love seeing all the action in people's offices. Great. Okay, so chat is at the bottom. I'm about to start sharing my screen so that you guys can see everything. Oh, perfect. Hello. Okay, everybody's got it. All right, so I'm going to start screen sharing. I think we're all going to continue to be able to see each other. So don't think you're invisible and do anything inappropriate while we've got this going on. Feel free to mute the video if you want to, but I love seeing everybody's faces. I'm going to leave mine up, and we were just joking around here that this is the time that probably we'll have like 30 delivery people show up at our door and interrupt us, but anyway, we'll keep going. All right, so here we go. Let me get to my screen and make sure that I am sharing the right thing. All right, so from the beginning, here we go, everybody. Can you see it?
Yeah.
Everybody's okay? Okay, great. And you can still see each other? Perfect. All right. Okay, so the topic today is leading in a VUCA world and kind of the key behaviors that we need to know now to survive and thrive. So just a quick reminder again, mute, keep yourself muted if you've got, especially if you've got people walking into your office and around. I know some of us are in open concept like I am here. And then use the chat function. Leanna's going to keep her eye on it, and we will see, you know, if any questions are coming up. But I'm going to also be pausing through today's presentation. So I'm going to start just by those of you, I think most of you on the call know us. I'm going to give you all a bit of an overview update on where we're at today at the Roundtable, who we are, and then we're going to dive right into this, I put in brackets, the harsh reality of leadership, because that's how it feels a little bit today. It is not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. And then I want to share a model of leadership with all of you so that we all have common language as we look at the behaviors that are key for leadership. And we're going to take a look at, you know, kind of this, what's happening in this VUCA world that we're in that causes some derailment, and what we need to know and manage. And I know for a lot of us, we're in roles where we're often coaching other people. And so what are the signs that, you know, maybe somebody is going to kind of fall off the tracks and be in trouble? So that's what we're going to look for. I've got Q&A at the back end where we'll kind of have some spots through the presentation as well for you to kind of put in some questions and answer as we go along. So here's our story. So we are the Roundtable. We are really been designed for ambitious leaders, and originally it was for that kind of mid-career person, but over the years it's really evolved into programming that's been designed for that top 20% in an organization. Really the goal when I started the program was to help people. I wanted to build a tribe of leaders, and I used to jokingly say I wanted to build a tribe of leaders who give a shit. Really the reality is what we're trying to do is build a tribe of conscious leaders with intention, who have an intention of raising up people and really making an impact in that leader that can balance that profit and people kind of orientation. We are Toronto based in Canada, but we do offer our programs virtually across mostly North America, but we have had some global programs where we've had folks from India and Australia involved. involved. By the numbers, we've won 7 different kinds of awards for learning and development, for being a trusted advisor, and for various entrepreneurial awards that speak to kind of the growth of our business. We have had over 780 participants go through our various programs and have a group of about 175 senior executive leaders who contributed various things from mentoring to speaking to writing for us over the years. Really see ourselves as a platform for helping facilitate leadership learning. I'm very happy to say that 98% of who've gone through our programs recommend them. We use the Net Promoter Score to measure our effectiveness, and we have a very high satisfaction rate within the programs that we do run. And in fact, we saved companies that we've worked with many millions of dollars on different metrics. So we're really proud of that. We've got lots of different ways that we track results depending on what the client's looking for, but something that we measure quite closely. And there's some great case studies if you're interested on some of the things we've been able to do. In terms of how we do the work we do, we're very much focused on small group. We believe small group builds high impact. We're also very focused on targeting. So coming up with, I like to think of it as being very precision, helping leaders really focus in on something that's going to make the biggest impact. And really that's all around shifting mindset and behavior. So whereas a lot of leadership development kind of focuses above the surface on knowledge and skills, it's really not enough to know, you have to do. And so that's where we put a lot of our attention. We're trying to expand leaders' toolkits so they're really able to be equipped to deal with the different challenges that face us, because leadership, after all, is situational, as we're going to be talking about today. And we take people on a journey. It's not a one and done with the Roundtable. It's very much a process that can take anywhere from 3 to 24 months, depending on the kind of program that you're working with us on. And our goal is to really help people kind of stand on their own 2 feet and to be able to take this work back into the organization. I'm really a big believer. I'm a line manager myself. I'm about, my philosophy is that we need to empower our line managers to be able to do a lot of the work that sometimes those of us who are more on that learning side of things maybe keep behind the curtain. So the 3 programs that we have the Roundtable for Leaders, which is a group coaching program. We have the Roundtable Catalyst, which is a group mentoring program. And then we have Roundtable for Teams, which is what it sounds like. It's intact teams. So whether that's an executive team or a marketing team or a sales team. And so our programs are in those 3 buckets. And the outcomes that we get all the time from people is there's always increased self-insight from individuals that go through our programs. Very strong focus on goal and being able to make significant movement, whether that's a team with a goal or individuals with a development goal, a group trying to move forward against a certain goal. Obviously, organizations, really, our goal is to really move the organization forward in terms of where they're trying to get to. And the other kind of output of the programs is that they create networks, these really strong strategic networks. And what I've noticed over the years of working with the clients we work with is all of this sort of culminates together to create a really interesting ripple effect in organizations. When you bring these small groups of leaders together, it really starts to translate into a lot of different areas. And so we start seeing culture change happen, the building of cultures like coaching cultures, learning cultures, things like that. So that's us. We work with a variety of clients across a variety of different things. Is the best part of our job, I think, is that we get to see leaders in all kinds of contexts. So, but here's what I know about all those leaders, and those are some of the clients that we work with and have worked with over the past. Really, the topic that came up today, which is about what's going on in this VUCA world that we're living in, is something that's translating across all industries. It doesn't matter whether I'm working with a not-for-profit or if we're working with a big global company. It seems like we're all in the same kind of state. So this is my first interactive portion of the program. So what I'd like you to do is to jump into the chat right now. And for you, as you think about leadership today in your organization, or if you're working with leaders, what's the new normal for you? What is the new normal for leaders and leadership today? I'd love you to kind of write in some kind of answers into that in the chat. And I am going to hopefully be able to find the chat. It'll pop up for me somewhere, I think. Okay, I got some questions. Oh, perfect. All right, I am seeing stuff in the chat. Okay, so change is rapid. Yes, huge technology-driven change. Very much so. Yeah, a lot of technology. I remember my first job was at the Ottawa Citizen, and I used to do ads that were in the paper. And I had like a rush ad was 4 days. Now I think probably a rush ad is half an hour. You know, the pace of change has been huge. Marcella says inclusive. Yes, we're looking to be more inclusive in our organizations. Christine says be adaptable but decisive, test and learn. Yeah, there's this great word that's buzzing around right now. Agility. Oh, Caitlin said agility. Thank you. Redesign agile. There's Ina saying that. Yep. Community is becoming a priority. Huge. There's a whole bunch of studies right now about loneliness, you know, at work, in the workplace, and people feeling incredibly isolated. Those are great. Yeah. People at the core. For sure. There's a lot of, I think we see that we've really shifted from this, I would say like we were in the knowledge age, I believe, and I've been using this phrase for a while now, we're in the age of collaboration, because, you know, knowledge takes you so far, but it's really our ability to tap in and connect with others to take us to the next level. Yeah, Ina says focus on purpose and social responsibility. And that's certainly happening more and more with our younger leaders that are coming into the organization. I read something recently that was that that's the #1 thing they look for in new employers, is that purpose. Transparent but not so secretive. Yeah, I love that, Niraf. I was just writing an article about that the other day, actually, about as leaders were told you have to be super transparent, but also don't tell people so much that you scare them. It's like this balance. Where do you find the balance? Okay, this is great. All right, so new normal. So let's jump back into the presentation and take a look at this concept of VUCA, right? Which is really what's you know, kind of been top of mind. And I heard this expression a few years ago. I don't know if it's new to anybody on the call, but when I looked to see where it was derived from, do you know that this expression VUCA was actually derived from the US military? And I just think that's a huge problem when we're using terms from the US military in our workplaces. There's something going wrong here. What are we doing to ourselves? And so, you know, VUCA stands for volatile. So we've got a huge amount of global volatility. We've got volatility in our leadership at the global level. I don't think I've ever in my life seen as much division. That's driving a lot of lack of certainty, right? So, you know, when we think about which is the right direction to go in, things and industries, technology, as you guys pointed out, is changing things on a dime, but a lot more complexity, right? It's a lot, with the technology breeds complexity. And I think the speed and rate of information that we get also adds to that complexity. It's very hard, you know, back in the day, your boss used to know as much about your job as you did. Now, in fact, studies show that our peers are the ones that we interact with the most, and leaders typically don't know. Something like interaction with the boss is about 12%, whereas interaction with peers is about 36 to 38%. There's much more ambiguity, right? It's much less clear. And so as we think about the effect on leaders today, what does this mean for us? You know, all of this volatility, this uncertainty, this ambiguity, here's what I notice it means. It means that we've got a whole lot of, our runway's a whole lot shorter. So the expectation, this pace and this speed is leading to an expectation that we need to hit the ground running really fast. When I started work years ago, I'm not going to say how many years ago, a lot of years ago, I can remember I had a mentor who said to me when I first started a job, I think it was about 25 at the time, and he said, you know, Glyne, your first year is all about learning. Your second year, you're able to begin contributing. And by the third year, you're really firing on all cylinders. I don't know anybody who has an ambition to stay in a job, the same job for 3 years. And I certainly don't know anybody who is given that much latitude to get up to speed in a second year. I don't know about you guys, but it's almost like we are expecting that people are going to come in, they're going to hit the ground running, and they're going to start delivering results really fast. And so these shorter runways, to me, it's one of the biggest things that contributes to making it easier to derail. But I'm not the only one who has done research and study on this. All of the big guys, if you think McKinsey, Deloitte, Bain, all of the management consultancies have spent a lot of time looking at the percentage of leaders that are slipping off the tracks. And depending on who you look at, and this is a big, broad number, and it's a scary number, between 30 to 70% of leaders are seen as struggling, are seen as sliding and slipping off career tracks. And it definitely depends on, you know, are we talking new managers versus senior executives? Is it a very volatile turnaround situation versus not? But what for me was surprising was just not only the range, but just imagine up to 70% in certain groups have a very hard time staying on track. And they, you know, one of the things that across all these surveys that people agree with is kind of the key attributes that cause the derailing behavior, you know, the derailment to happen. So I'm going to read through these, see if any of them sound familiar to you. Think about, you know, people in your organization maybe that you've seen who were doing really great and then seem to tank out. Here are some of the behaviors that come up kind of across everybody's surveys, whether you're talking about a senior executive or not. Arrogance, right? That arrogance, I already know everything, I don't need to learn, don't need to work on myself. That's a big one. Poor performance, kind of goes without saying, you're not performing, you're probably going to be derailing. Interpersonal relationships, you know, this is the EQ, and this is why we've seen EQ have a bigger voice in the last decade or more now. Interpersonal relationships, not being able to play well with others, as they used to say to us when we were in kindergarten. Integrity, ethics, and trust issues, right? People that get themselves into those kinds of trouble often, you know, derail their careers, and we've had some very big visible examples of that over the last few years. Lack of self-control, the inability to manage your own emotions. It's another one. I just love this little girl. I don't know who took these pictures, but it makes me wonder what they did to make her cry like that. That's for sure. Maybe it was the wig. I don't know. Perfectionism, you know, needing everything to be perfect. And when you think about, you know, the speed and pace of change, that kind of analysis paralysis, needing everything to, knowing how everything's going to go, can be a really big blocker for a lot of people. Failure to build a team. So this heroic leadership, right, where people show up and they're trying to take it all and muscle it through on their own. And then ability and resistance to change. So I talked a little bit earlier about this idea of agility, came up in the comments. Yeah, like how are we, you know, if we're not open to change and adaptive, and so a lot of my clients are using phrases like learning agility. If you like doing things the way you're doing it, that's going to put you at risk. And then the big one, and this is the one that really does come out across everybody's studies, and certainly in the work that we do, it's probably the #1 factor, is lack of self-awareness. If you are not really clear on where your opportunities lie, you're really putting yourself at risk. So that's the list. As you're kind of going through it and thinking about people maybe in your organization, are there any other derailing characteristics that you've seen that have really caused people to slip up? Any kind of behaviors, attributes of people that seem to fall off the track? Anybody got any new ones that you'd add to this list? So again, that arrogance, lack of self-awareness, self-control. That was me in my younger days. Lack of self-control. I always had opinions. And sometimes I just should have kept my mouth shut. Drive for performance at all costs from staff. That's a great one. Yeah, that kind of like taskmaster. Lack of self-belief and rooted in all of them. Yeah, it's a good point, Sandra. I think the list is complete. Well, thank you. I thought it was a good list too. And lack of vulnerability. It's a really good one too. Being uncomfortable, being vulnerable. Bias. Yes, we're hearing a lot about bias these days and people's bias. We all have bias. We all have bias. And the issue is, and this is what I've been noticing in the work that we've been doing, a lot of the times your bias is very much attached to your values. So we talk a lot about, leaders really understanding their values. One of the things that I've been thinking a lot about lately is helping leaders also understand the biases that get associated with those values, because our values very much are, drive our behavior. So bias is a great one. All right, so those are all the attributes that happen, but like, wouldn't you say that most people don't go into work every day trying to be, arrogant and jerks and heroic leaders? That's not what most people are looking to do when they go into work, right? So when we look at, what are the contributing factors here? Like, what are the things that create the risk of derailing? Before I show you the list, what would you say? Like, when do you think it gets heightened that these attributes start to come out for people? What are the things that are going on in the workplace that are contributing to that? Let's see if we can get a good list going. Getting a bigger role, absolutely. Stress and pressure, absolutely. Stress and change, job instability, that's a great one. I don't think that was actually on my list, but I think, yeah, that uncertainty around your job, which can cause stress, right? Poor business results, we're driving for that. Insecurity, yeah, great responses. This is the thing, and I think it's like the attribute, what we see, how we see people behaving, what we need to understand is what's the root cause underneath that, right? What's going on underneath that? So here's some of the things from the studies that have come out in terms of when does the risk of derailment go up the most. So one is when the person is taking that big leap, new stretch role. We know through, various research on leadership, there are certain positions when you move up, sometimes it's from senior manager to director, running a team to running a department. Those sort of pivot points that can really affect people's leadership, and that's when the chances for them tripping up become higher. Too much work. Like, how many of you have been in situations or see leaders in situations where they're backfilling a role until the next person gets hired, right? They are overstretched. The in-basket is way overflowing from their ability to push things through to the out-basket. Ambiguous expectations, unclear expectations. This is a really big one, right? So if I'm not clear on what the expectations are, chances are that I can be derailing and not even know it. And if I'm not getting feedback, if I'm in the dark about feedback and in the dark about performance, that kind of compounds itself. Stress, right? We talked about stress came up. Woman eating her laptop, I don't know. I had fun finding these images, I have to tell you. Being overwhelmed, so being promoted too quickly, that old expression, sink or swim. There's a lot of people out there today that are actually sinking. They're not swimming, and a lot of it has to do with, too much scope too quickly. We've got this baby boomer exit that's been happening. A lot of companies that I'm working with do not have the leadership bench strength they need, and they're seeing a very big exit right now of people, even at the 55. I've got a number of clients that have hit that 55 mark, been with companies 25 years, and they're cashing out. So this sink or swim piece is a big one that seems to be hitting big right now. And then the last one is tolerating really poor behaviors and having that become very entrenched. So when negative behavior gets entrenched, that's when it becomes very difficult to change, and that can cause all kinds of ripple effects in the organization. But when you look at all these and you think about the attributes that come up, you can kind of see why things come up, right? So I'm overwhelmed with work, and so I'm going to power through everything to try and make it go away. You know, I'm going to be the superhero leader who's going to just get it all done. There's lack of certainty going on in the organization. So, you know, maybe I have a short fuse, and that fuse is just going to come out more because I'm frustrated and I don't know the direction and I don't know what's expected of me. All of these things you can start to see get triggered when we see the kind of situations that leaders are being put in. And frankly, it's all VUCA, right? This is all about change. This is all about being stretched. This is all about being pushed. You know, in many cases, I think a lot of people are being pushed to the brink, to be honest. And I think probably in your organizations, you're seeing some similar things. So I see some comments are in, so I'm just going to go to the chat real quick and see. Yeah, oh, Diane, I love that comment. Fear of vulnerability and being judged, fear that asking for help results in appearing incompetent. Those are great ads. There is this big fear. I think we see this all the time in the Roundtable program, because one of the first things we're doing in that program is trying to get people to be more vulnerable. And yet what I see with a lot of our leaders today is we've become so transactional in our work that we haven't made the space to build connection and relationship. And so as a result, we're all walking around with these big shells around us, pretending that we know what we're doing, right? Pretending that we've got it all figured out. And we think that everybody else does have it all figured out, right? When in fact, nobody has it all figured out. I work with executive teams all the time. I can tell you, most of them do not know. You know, they're doing the best they can with the information they have, right? That's the reality. So let's take a look at, you know, the leadership behavior. I want to kind of break down some leadership behaviors for us so that we have a bit of a common language. Behavior is one of these tricky things because it's sometimes very hard to articulate behavior. So I'm going to use the tool that we use here at the Roundtable to talk about behavior. It's been developed by Management Research Group. They're based out of Portland, Maine. They look at 6 functions of leadership. So here are the 6 functions. You need to be able to, as a leader, you need to be able to create a vision. You then need to get followership around that vision. You need to implement the vision, make things happen, follow through on the implementation plan, achieve results, and then team play. So how you get other people and how you engage others in doing all of those things, right? So 6 functions of leadership. Within those functions, there's 22 behaviors that we're going to take a look at in a minute. And we've got and then they look at 26 effectiveness measures, which is looking at both the business and cognitive skills of an individual and the people and EQ skills. And so when they pull their best practice research, they're looking at how effective is this person on these 2 metrics, and then what are the behaviors they're demonstrating that are allowing them to be so effective. It's a global database. They've been around for over 40 years, so highly, highly validated research, which is not that common. You know, there's a lot of assessment tools out there, but what I love about this tool is that it's extremely validated. So let's dive a little closer into each function so you can kind of see how the pieces come together. As we go through these behaviors, I want you to think about what it's like to lead in a VUCA world, right? So we've talked about this uncertainty, this complexity, all of the change, you know, what's happening in our organizations and the demands on leadership. As I share these behaviors with you, I want you to put like a little star or jot on a little piece of paper. What's a behavior that you think would be really critical given this kind of volatile environment? Okay, so let's go. And I'm going to do a pause at the end and see what people come up with. So the first, and I don't know if you can see because of I'm not sure if you're seeing the same screen. I'm going to move us over to this side. So the first is conservative. So the conservative behavior is studying past practices. We're looking at predictability. This is the leader who's in the room who says, you know, well, when we did this last year, this is what happened, right? This is the leader who draws on previous experience. Innovative is about, and again, these are the definitions from the MRG tool. Innovative in this context is about comfort with taking risks and untested approaches. This leader is going to say, hey, let's try it. Technical, acquiring in-depth knowledge. So this is about being that subject matter expert, you know, knowing your stuff inside and out. Self is about emphasizing the importance of making decisions independently. Might say somebody like Donald Trump is a very high self leader. He's somebody who's very comfortable making the calls on his own. We see high self leaders in all kinds of different walks of life. They're the ones who say, I think we need to do this. I want to do that. This is what I'm mandating, that kind of language. And then strategic, which is taking a long range view, planning ahead, analysis, data, to inform sort of that long-range decision-making process. So if you were to pick, thinking about how crazy it is out there, if you were to pick one behavior that you think would be pretty critical for leaders to have today, which one do you think would, what would show up on your list? What's one that would show up on your list? Strategic, says Christine. Innovative, innovative. Yeah, so that comfort with change and risk. Yeah, need to take risks. Yeah, so we'll come back to that. We'll see what the actual research study said, but all good guesses. All right, so going back in then, so let's take a look now at developing followership. So this is, you've got the big vision now. How are you going to get the people behind your vision? How are you going to convince them to kind of follow you along? So there's 4 behaviors under here. The first is persuasive. So that's being able to win other people over to your point of view using your language, right? How do you convince others to do, to follow you along? Outgoing is that extroverted, friendly, informal manner. These, this is the individual who's really great at building relationships. This is the manager who always asks you how your weekend was and is actually genuinely interested in your answer, as opposed to doing it because they feel like it's the right thing to do. Excitement is the degree to which you operate with a high level of energy. It can, I think, and sometimes we see this high excitement often associated with, you know, that kind of charismatic leader, lots of passion, lots of energy, lots of enthusiasm. And restraint is almost not the opposite, but it's that leader who works very hard to maintain composure, works very hard to not, you know, show too much emotion in things. So again, I'm going to ask you, if you're thinking about leading in a VUCA world, what's a behavior that you think might come up as being pretty critical to have at this point? Here we go, looking in the chat. Persuasive. Yep, so being able to get people on side around its change, the idea. Yep, another vote for persuasive coming in. Excitement, yes, that kind of enthusiasm, energy, let's get people pumped about things. Could absolutely see that. You can see how behavior is tricky, right? Because you have to think about the situation, and you have to think about the kind of environment that the change is in, and you know, this is what I find fascinating about this kind of research, because we really see the nuances within behavior. That's great. So a lot of, for excitement and persuasive seems to be our top 2 in that one. All right, so let's move on. We'll go to how do we implement the vision? So this is getting things to actually happen. Because we know there's lots of great ideas, but do you actually get it done? So the first behavior here is structure. There's 4 behaviors. The first is structure, and that is that you are somebody who likes to have a very methodical process. You're very good at helping people understand how to get from point A to B to C to D to E, right? Tactical is very focused on the short range, hands-on, practical strategies. This is the leader who knows exactly what needs to be done and has no fear of kind of getting down in there with their people to figure things out. Communication very much is about setting expectations. So you're really clear with people of what's expected, and you proactively are good about keeping people informed as things move along. And then lastly, delegation. Delegation in this definition is that you're giving people meaningful tasks. You're not just shoving things off on people, but you're actually giving them things that they'd like. So again, cast your vote. Okay. Communication, yeah. Yeah, because you can see in times of volatility, that would be something that would come up as being pretty critical to keep people in the loop, have those expectations clear. So delegation, Nirav says getting out of the way. communication and tactical, so being hands-on and also being clear on expectations. Another vote for delegation. Okay, great. So let's go on to our next one, which is the follow through. So 2 in here. So, and they're both kind of interesting. So control is about having deadlines, monitoring progress. As a leader who tends to be kind of lower control, I give things to people and then a week later I'll be like, oh, wait a second, where is that, right? Or I'll be at the last minute going, hey, I need this from you. I was doing that to Leona all morning about this webinar. So control behavior is about having the follow through, following up appropriately, making sure things are staying on track. And then feedback is letting people know in a very straightforward manner how they're doing. That can be positive, that can be constructive, but people really have a good sense of how they've performed and if they're meeting expectations. So again, if you were to choose one here, and you could say, you know what, I don't think any of these are important, don't have to pick one, but if you were to pick one, what do you think? So feedback's coming out as the top there. It's interesting, just fun fact, control is a behavior when they do best practice research on CEOs. It's actually, CEOs tend to be higher control on things. Oprah, and they had some behaviors of some kind of fairly well-known people. Control was the behavior that came out for those top CEOs. But everybody here is kind of voting in the delegation camp, so, or in the feedback camp, I should say. All right, so last 2. So this next set is about achieving results. So there's 3 behaviors over how we get results done. So the first is management focus. So are you the kind of leader that likes to take charge, really comfortable leading the efforts of other people, enjoys that kind of role, right? Dominant is that the level of vigor that you use to push your agenda, to push for results, for being forceful and assertive around what needs to get done, competitive even, you know, that's this real forcefulness. And then the last one is production. So this is about having very high standards for yourself, for your team, setting a bar high. You know, the leaders like that, the language you would hear is, what can we do better next time? That wasn't good enough. How can we do it differently? You know, this sort of constantly raising the bar. So again, what do you think? VUCA, any of these matter or not so much? Christine says management focus. Yeah, Caitlin says production. Management focus from Sandra. Yeah, production. So kind of split between these. Nobody wants to be too dominant, right? And it's actually, it's funny in the LEA, in this particular tool, there are certain behaviors that absolutely always have to be used in moderation. If you ever saw a leader in the 99th percentile of dominant, you'd probably want to run for the hills. But yeah, everybody's sort of flipping between production and management focus. Okay, so last one, and then we're going to actually look at the survey results. So team play. So I kind of, when I look at anybody's 360 in this tool, I look and see where are their team play behaviors, because it really tells me how they approach everything else, right? So cooperation, which is the cooperative leader is willing to put aside their own goals to support somebody else's and help them achieve. So it might mean that I don't get my targets met, but I'm helping you get your targets met. Consensual is about valuing the ideas of others. So the consensual leader is going to go around. It doesn't mean that they build consensus. Don't get confused with that. But it means that they will involve other people in their thinking, and they will use that to inform their decisions. The next one is authority. Authority is an interesting one. So authority means loyal to the organization and respecting the ideas of senior leaders. And then finally, empathy shows an active care and concern for others. So again, last one, which would you pick, if any? Again, you don't have to pick any of them, but which ones would you do? Okay, here we go. Lots of votes for consensual. We've got empathy sneaking in there. So yeah, this idea of bringing others along with us as we're going through a change or having to lead through very difficult times involving other people would seem to make sense, right? and caring for people as we're going through all of this. Absolutely. So let's see what the behaviors, the key behaviors are that came out of the survey. So here's what the research survey looked at. They did the study again using the LEA across 50 countries. There was 30 industries involved. It was all levels of leadership. 31% of the respondents were female, 54% male, and 15% did not respond. So that gives you kind of a sense of the scope of the study. And here's what I want you to think about. So I'm going to describe the two leadership approaches. Think about which one you are, and then I'm going to tell you which is, you know, the behavior that was the standout. So think for yourself, are you somebody who tends to go with your gut? Are you highly intuitive as a leader? Like you can see the trend, you know where things are going before it actually happens? Or are you that leader that does spend a lot of time doing analysis and planning? So just pick one for yourself, and I'm going to tell you, so everybody's got their behavior that they feel like they lean more towards. Here's the behavior that came out as critical in the study. So strategic, that ability to take a long-range view that is grounded in fact and analysis, less so on gut, more on analysis and fact. That's the first behavior that became critical when they did the survey on handling volatility. Second one, again, think about it. Does this sound more like you or not? Are you that person who's super comfortable leading a team, telling people what to do, kind of, hey, you, like this guy here, pointing, you know, move this into this thing? Or are you somebody who prefers to work collaboratively with others, who tends to be, you know, see yourself as one of the team, maybe more of a team-based approach to your leadership? Where do you sit on that? Okay. According to the research survey, the behavior, and you guys did pick this one out as well as you picked out strategic, is management focus. So management focus, when we are in the time of VUCA, we need people who are going to step up and say, okay, here's where we need to go. This is what we need to do. This is how we're going to you know, approach this situation. So not afraid to step strongly into that leadership role. So are you the kind of leader that has really, like the leader on the left, that really in-depth knowledge, really, really deep, you are the subject matter expert, or are you more like the leader on the right who's the jack of all trades? Which one are you? And which one do you think is going to be more important when you're leading an ambiguity? This one actually surprised me when I saw it, because I thought it would probably be better to be a bit of a generalist. Turns out, no, it's the technical expertise. It is having some depth in technical expertise, which is really critical in this, at this time, or in this particular situation. The next one, are you the leader who is really looking to minimize risk? Are you being very clear and careful about what the plans are, and where are you that leader on the left who is, you know, saying to everybody, okay, let's slow down, let's think about this? Or are you the leader that says, let's take the leap, let's see what happens, let's try it, let's test it, let's do it, right? Where do you tend to fall on that spectrum? If you're falling on the right side, that's where the research would say we need to be. It's the innovative, so that's that comfort with change, and I think you guys called that one out quite strongly when we were kind of going through it. The next one, you know, are you the leader that is just constantly focused on selling your ideas to other people? You are very comfortable kind of making the case, or are you the kind of leader that is more about making those ideas happen? It's more about, you know what, I let my work talk for itself. I am the person who, you know, I don't need to be putting the sizzle on the steak. The steak is good, right? Persuasive is the behavior that came out in the best practices research as being critical. And then next, I think this is our next to last one. Are you a leader that shows your heart on your sleeve, like our friend Jim from the office? You might recognize Jim there. Or are you more like Claire from House of Cards, where you keep your emotions very close to your chest? People don't really know what's going on with you. Where would you put yourself on that? Be the heart leader, everybody knows, or are you more close to your chest? Close to your chest is where you need to be. Higher restraint. As we are going through change, what we don't want to see is leaders running around panicking and worrying and showing stress on their faces. We don't want to be so Claire restraint. So I don't want to give you that impression that we're talking about getting up to the 99th percentile. What we're saying here, though, is that leaders who are slightly higher on restraint know when to be transparent about their concerns, but also when to, you know, demonstrate strength and keep those emotions in check is really key. And then the last one, you know, are you the person on the right who consults your boss regularly, is completely connected to what he or she wants to do? Or are you more like the person on the left who might have the t-shirt that says the only boss I listen to is Springsteen, right? You're not listening to anybody, you're kind of driving your own road. This is related to the authority behavior, and this one is where it's kind of interesting, because with authority, what we see with leaders that manage well in complex environments and volatile environments is that they actually have slightly lower authority. Now, they're not all the way in the bottom 5th percentile, but they're probably more in the 30th or 40th percentile, which says that as much as they will listen to their boss, they are also going to be the person that says, this is not going to work, or there's a different way that we need to do this, right? So it's this idea that they are quite willing and comfortable to speak up if they see things going wrong. Okay, so this is it all in a summary. So here we have under creating a vision, there was actually 3 behaviors that came out. We had strategic, innovative, and technical. A leader that looks ahead, is comfortable with risk, but also has a lot of technical expertise, so can deep dive and know how to mitigate risk, right? So it's not a very intuitive. This is a very thoughtful leader who understands what the stakes are and understands how to navigate through that. Management focus, willing to step up and to own that leadership mantle, as we talked about. Persuasive, can sell the ideas, can bring others along. Higher restraint, so not super high. Again, I put this in about the 50th percentile, maybe, yeah, around, probably in the middle, right? Somebody who's about 50th percentile on restraint. 5% restraint is we know what you're thinking at all times. 99% restraint is Claire from House of Cards, and you don't want to be that either. But in the middle, where you can balance that transparency with also, you know, being appropriate and not, you know, putting fuel on the fire, which can often happen with our low restraint friends. And then lower authority. So that was under the team play behavior, where there was much more of an emphasis on pushing back a little bit on the boss, because again, it makes sense, right? It's VUCA. Things are running at 100 miles an hour, and we don't necessarily know, you know, what's going to happen, and our boss doesn't have all the answers, right? So I think probably at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip it over to, so what do you do with all of this? And then I'm going to go into the chat and ask you guys some questions, because now it's sort of like, now what? So you've got, and you know, hopefully you kind of identified a behavior. So what I'd like you to do is sort of think about, oh, maybe I'll go back to this. Think about the behavior. Is there one behavior that you recognize, gee, I need to do a little bit more of that? Is there a behavior that jumped out for you? Or maybe it's people that you're coaching and that you can see, you know what, I've got a coachee in mind that I can see really needs to demonstrate more of that. Why don't you throw that in the chat for me for a quick second? What's the behavior? Management focus. Yeah, that's often one for a lot of people, especially if you're comfortable being an individual contributor. Restraint, oh my God, I have that tattooed on I should have that tattooed on me. Restraint is mine forever to work on. Management focus, Christine. I see a lot of people actually in organizations that have had, especially when they're making that leap into more senior management, having to make that shift from being almost like a senior individual contributor to having to take on that management mantle. It's a big leap for many people. Technical, so getting that subject matter expert. I see from you, Diana. Marcella says strategic. Yes, okay, you all have one. So here's the thing, and this is where it gets very tricky when we're doing this work with the leaders. It's like, kind of like, now what? So here's one of the things that is a challenge for all of us when we're trying to shift behavior. It's simply the fact that in our organizations, if we're trying to demonstrate that we're more strategic or that we're stepping up to be more in terms of management focus, the tricky thing is that we've been pigeonholed. People around us don't see us that way, right? And so we have to break out of that pigeonhole. And one of the ways, the best way that I've seen to do this working with the leaders that we've worked with, is that we need to get super specific on the behavior that we're trying to work on and change. And then we need to get the people around us to kind of see that behavior. And we need to start making small little shifts out of our comfort zone to try something different. When you start working on a new behavior, it feels uncomfortable. That is incredibly common, right? It feels very uncomfortable to try and do something. So for somebody who's low restraint, it's very hard to keep your mouth shut in a meeting, just to put it in a very simple context. That can be very difficult to do. So we have to do it with mindful intention, because it's not enough to just know that I need to work on restraint. It's what are we actually putting in place that's actually allowing us to move the needle on this behavior. And so what we encourage people to do is to go and say, instead of stopping, because usually also these things are attached to your strength, right? So my lower restraint behavior is actually attached to my high excitement behavior very much, right? So I don't want to water down my enthusiasm and my excitement, but I do need to dial up that restraint. So what do I need to do more of, right, in order to be more of a well-rounded leader? And so if you're curious and you'd like to know for your behavior that you picked out, what you can do is you can email Liana, and she's going to send you a tip sheet that's going to outline what's the behavior that you'd like to work on and what are some tips that you can actually put into practice, okay? So curious, or actually, you can even put them in the chat maybe, if you want to. Oh, there, Liana put her thing in the chat. Thank you, Liana. So that, for me, has been kind of an interesting thing to work with leaders on, is how do you start to round out your behavior? Because really, we're talking about VUCA, we're talking about the behaviors that are key for leaders in this environment, what they need to work on now. But this is just one situation, and that's kind of the reality about leadership, is that it's highly situational. And so I wanted to kind of end on just kind of one last thing for everybody to help you take it further if you're interested. So if this has kind of piqued your interest and you're like, oh my gosh, like I want to dig deeper into my leadership and I want to understand more about how I'm leading and how I'm showing up, or maybe there's somebody in your group that you'd like to give a bit more support to, we're enrolling for our Roundtable for Leaders coaching program. So this is really quickly how it works. So we're looking for leaders who are interested in kind of moving their dial on their leadership. We engage their boss, who looks a lot like Gene Simmons in this clip art picture, I noticed. We engage the boss in the process, and then our coach, and where we do the program is in Toronto. It's held from 6 to 9 in the evening, and it's every 6 weeks. So it's kind of an easy schedule. You're not having to be here every 2 minutes. There's 8 people in your cohort, and there's 8 sessions in total. You have 7 coaching hours with your coach. You have access to our new Roundtable Academy, which I'm super excited about, 24/7. It's an online academy of resources. You can come to our leadership conference in November, which is called Recharge. You meet with other people from across all of our client partners, and you're part of this growing network of over 780 leaders. This is what the process looks like. You're going to do your 360 based on this tool that you just saw. You're going to determine your big bang for the buck behavior. Maybe it's one of the ones that's critical in leading in VUCA. Maybe it's something else for you because of the situation you're in. We're going to do a 3-way alignment meeting with your boss so that you can see what that they're on board with what your plan is. You're going to create a very clear action plan, and then we help you set your North Star, which is your values, look at your strengths, and then create your own personal brand, your own legacy, plus give you some additional tools based on the needs of your particular group. And the whole goal being to help you be successful and achieve those goals. For people in the program, we've had 100% say they've increased their self-insight, 86% make excellent progress against their goals, 76% have increased their job satisfaction, 92% increased their coaching skills, 78% increased feelings of engagement with their organization, and we've actually had 73% of our clients receive promotions or changes in scope to their role after completing the program. So if that's something you're interested in, we've got 4 seats left. I'm going to ask you can get a hold of Susan if you're interested, and if you use the code WEBWIN, we'll give you 10% off your registration because she sat here through this with me today. So I wanted to share that because, you know, sometimes people are like, okay, this is all really good, but how do I start to shift my behavior and how do I start to make a change? So I'm curious, I think we thought, do we have a few minutes left? I think I got 6 minutes left for me questions, 5 minutes left for questions. So I want you to jump in. Any questions that have come up for this for you as you've been listening to these behaviors, do they make sense? Can you kind of see the profile of this leader needing to be kind of the strategic, deep knowledge, stepping up kind of person? Any sort of, I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody again and come back. There we go. Yeah, any sort of reactions? Did anything of those behaviors surprise you or not make sense? Or you're like, what about this line? Was this useful? You can unmute yourselves and talk to me. It's okay. Great insights. Thank you.
Hey,
nice
Lauren.
to see you on the call, Lena. Hi, Christine.
Hello.
Hello.
I thought it was really interesting because it was a very unique mix of a lot of different characteristics.
Mm.
Do you find, or has the study kind of shown that if those characteristics are represented maybe in a leadership team versus having one person, you know, kind of be firing on all of those cylinders, what does the research kind of say around that? Like in terms of demonstrating that as a team versus...
So collectively, everybody was demonstrating these behaviors.
Yeah.
What would that mean? I don't think they've done the research that way. The research has tended to be more about the individual leaders and looking at the effectiveness of those leaders across those metrics of business and people, right? So that's what those behaviors kind of bubble out because of the back end that they look at in terms of, okay, they're demonstrating those behaviors, but how effective is this around leading change? So there's certain questions that they have in their back end research questions that are all around managing change, keeping people engaged, all of that kind of, you know, piece that loads into this. So I don't think they've looked at it collectively and thing, but you would think that, I would think that, if you have a team where the focus is on knowing that as leaders, we need to be doing these kinds of behaviors, I mean, that kind of is the premise of the work that we do when we do work with executive teams, right? It's to kind of get everybody rowing in the same direction. You're always going to have situational things where a leader may be, like, I think this is really interesting, and it says, as leaders, when we're in VUCA, these are the behaviors that really stand out. But you might have a new team where, frankly, you need to be much stronger at communicating expectations and delegating or something, you know. So for you in that situation, the fact that, you know, there's these other behaviors, that those might not be the big bang for the buck behavior for you, given the role you're in and the kind of group that you're leading. So I think we always want to filter these things against the situation that the leader finds themselves in. So this is kind of a good, for me, it's kind of the big blanket as we're looking at leaders in our organizations. What are the key things we need to be looking for with them and supporting them around for those of us that are in that kind of role? But for those of us that are individual leaders, it's a little bit of going, is this really the biggest thing I need to focus on right now? Even if I am working in this crazy environment, I will say that when I look at other best practice research that MRG's done, there are some kind of, I almost call them like anchor behaviors that always bubble up to the top. Strategic is always the number one thing. It's always across, whether it's best practices for CEOs, for female CEOs, for high potential leaders, doesn't matter. It's always strategic. And communication is often a very close second, right? So I think that's what I would say. I don't know if this is helping you, but I think for sure if you have leaders all on the same language, common language with clarity, I can't imagine that doing anything but help. But if it's, but I still think you have to drill it down into the situation. Any other last questions? I know I think we're hitting up at our time, but anybody else have anything? Diana?
I'll throw one in.
Oh.
Well, I love the list of behaviors and they're great. And I'm just wondering, is there any criteria to measure, to identify whether or not these behaviors are present / prevalent?
Is there any criteria?
Well, how do we gauge in ourselves or in others in a uniform way so that we are speaking the same language? Because that's the great equalizer. Are we speaking the same language?
Yeah.
Person A says, I have all of these things, or this person has all of these things. And do we have some ways in which to measure and identify these behaviors and skills?
And I think that's where, I think that piece around self-insight becomes so critical. I think the more we can, for ourselves, deepen our understanding of self, and if we're leading within teams or we're working with organizations, internal as coaches, if you do one thing in leadership, I think it's how can you cultivate more self-insight with the people that you're working with? Because that is going to be the game changer ultimately, right? If you don't have that level of self-insight, you're not going to ever be able to see how, gee, when I say this, this happens. And I do think that's why tools, we use the MRG tool as we showcased today. When somebody does go through their 360, they do get that self-insight and self-awareness. That is what starts to, we all have blind spots, all of us do, right? So it's all of that starts to pull the blind spots off of our leadership. And I think when you can do that as a collective, right? When you can cultivate that together, then you're creating this environment where you can all support each other, create that common language. It's not something that's just about you. I think there was a comment earlier about people being afraid to speak up, afraid to be vulnerable. If we could start to get rid of all of that garbage, that would make a big difference. That makes sense?
Yeah, and that was me who said that. So it's all in line with that is, just what comes to me in that is that in addition to having the ability to look at oneself, we also have to have the ability to communicate with each other in a safe way so that we could hear the blind spots that others can see.
Yeah, 100%. So it's like, I think that cultivating of connection, cultivating of community is definitely where we need to go, because we've become so transactional, right? So transactional. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you everybody so much for being with me today. Really appreciate it. And we're going to start doing more of these webinars, so stay tuned. We're going to try and we've got so much research and things that have been sitting in our back door that we're going to start doing these on a more regular basis. So I look forward to having more of you. And so Liana will send out a little feedback survey after to get your feedback on it, and then we can make some tweaks for future editions. So thank you. Great to see everybody. Bye.